All right. Well, welcome everybody. Uh, you guys are seeing maybe a few of these now that we've done, and really what I'm trying to do is, man, I've met some interesting people, and Daniel is definitely one of those people. We met in uh Kentucky. Is that at the
Hmm.
Deathwork practice? Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
That was a really fun event. It was more of an intimate deal. They had uh five of us maybe that were presenting, and it was a much it just wasn't one of those massive deals. We were able to interact with people, and it gave us a chance actually to hang out too. So I got to meet Daniel and actually get to know him a bit, and we had a great time. And honestly, it was there that I learned just how much Daniel knew about bits, and it kind of made me understand a little bit how little I knew. So I got to learn a lot, and I just thought I had a couple questions actually on one of my on the forum there, and I thought, you know what, I just don't know how to answer this well enough, and so I thought, man, I just need to get Daniel to come and join us and see if we could learn something from his presentation and some of the things that he can share with us. So the plan is we're going to let Daniel share a little. I'd like him to kind of give us a bit more insight on bidding, and then I'd like to open it up so people get a chance to ask some questions. So when we get to those questions, everyone, do your best. I know that you all have heard this from me before, but do your best to be precise and specific with your question, which will allow everybody to maybe get a couple questions in. Once we get to those questions, you just put your hand up, and then I'll facilitate that process, and hopefully we can get a bunch of different people through with different thoughts and questions, and just pick Daniel's brain. So, kind of the question that I was excited about, Daniel, was, man, there's a lot about bidding, but I'm sure there's, five or six things that, they're pretty big pieces that you think, that you see, or maybe that you come across that people struggle with, or maybe don't know about. So I'd love to turn it over to you and hear what you kind of some of the things that you might, uh, yeah, have to share with us about bits and bidding.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Josh. It's always a pleasure to get to interact with you again.
Yeah.
And you're right, that was an incredible event where we got to meet and all that. And I say I've kind of formed relationships with every single person that was there on the
Mm-hmm.
presenter side, and as you know, that doesn't always work out that way. So
Mm-hmm.
anyhow,
Yeah, that's
um,
the truth.
well, I guess I'll kind of start in the same order that we lay the videos and
Mm-hmm.
everything out, and that is I always kind of start with anatomy. People tend to start wondering about snaffles and spade bits and pellums, and it gets real discipline specific and all. But we're all riding horses, and horses are all built to the same parts, and those parts work the same way, whether it's a Lipizzan or an Arab or a Clydesdale. So that's kind of where I try to begin things. And the first thing that I'll tell y'all is that as far as bits go, it is all about the horse's tongue. That is absolutely the thing you're communicating with. The tongue is the most sensory part of the entire body, in my opinion. If you think about it, it's the only part of the body that's involved in three of the five senses: touch, taste, and smell. If anybody that has raised kids know that kids get to the crawling stage and all of a sudden you say don't put that in your mouth more often than you say their name, and that is because developmentally your mouth is actually more neurologically wired than the rest of your body. They get more sensory input from their mouth than they would even their hands, their eyes, any other part of their body at that developmental stage, and all of that stuff is exactly the same for horses. One of the things that I like to do is pick up an odd object, like this is a cap to a Gatorade bottle, and let's pretend like I have a pecan or something in this hand. You all know exactly what this would feel like if you put it in your mouth. You know, the texture, the hardness, the little rough spots, the smooth spots, and that goes to the neurological diversity of the tongue. What I find is that the bit salesman and people tend to be very, very worried about the bars of the horse's mouth. And if you're regularly communicating through bar pressure, your horse hates you. You have passed a whole lot of communicative stuff before you ever get to the bars.
Mm.
One of the things that I like to outline is something that I call the action chain. And this is basically all of the little steps that would happen if you were communicate through the bridle. And let me say here too, most all of this stuff is exactly the same, even if you're not riding with a bit. So if you're in a hackamore or some type of bitless bridle, 90% of the information I'm providing is still absolutely relevant. So and I also want to say here, I'm not trying to pretend that your seat and your legs and all those things don't exist. I'm very well aware that the bit is but a fraction of the whole picture. It just is the part of the picture that I tend to focus on with these types of lectures. So the action chain is basically all of the little things that would happen in that second and a half of you giving a horse a cue. So I come from a cutting horse background. In the cutting horse world, we have a whole level of employees called lopers, and their job is to lope horses and get them warmed up. And cutting horses get really super sensitive about a stop, and it's always really fun when you hire a new loper because they'll be out there loping a horse around and you wave at them to bring you the horse, and you can tell the thought process goes through their head. When I get up here to the gate, I'm going to stop. And when that word runs through their brain, that horse will slam on the brakes and they wind up looking like a little Scud missile, kissing ears and everything. And that's because your body subconsciously prepared to stop, and the horse can feel that. Then you're going to consciously do whatever you maybe do. Wait one stirrup, move a leg out, whatever it might be with your seat. You're going to do that. You're going to change your hands on the reins. One of the things I like about dressage is they kind of talk about piano keys and stuff. So little subtle vibrations will go through the reins as you're moving your hands and adjusting things. The horse is going to feel the reins moving on their neck. Then we're going to have the rein loops on the bottom ring of the bit, be it a snaffle or a shanked bit, doesn't matter. Those rein loops are going to move up and down, and that's going to send subtle vibrations through the cheek of the bit into the mouthpiece. You've now made contact with the soft tissues of the mouth. This is actually the first step where what kind of bit is on the horse matters. So imagine how many things most people blow through that fast, and what kind of bit you had on the horse didn't matter at all up until this point. So now we make contact with the soft tissues, which is predominantly the tongue and the lips and the corners of the mouth. We then gradually compress those tissues, and this is the only step in which the actual physics and mechanics of the bit comes into play. And then when you have fully compressed those soft tissues, you finally have made bar contact. So I like to break that down into that level of detail to tell you all, slow down. Don't pick up on those reins so quick, because there's a lot of communication that's supposed to take place, a lot of subtlety. And we have all kinds of people out there that are riding their horse around like they just rode through a spider web or something like that. And slow down, like they got to see you coming. That's I really find the more the neurological stuff comes out, to me, I think a pretty good definition of horsemanship these days would be recognition of the swapping between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So when you start reading the body language at the level that I am, it's very few people that pick up on the reins and don't cause the horse to brace up or flinch. I do a lot of video coaching where people will send me videos, and that kind of gave me the cause to start slowing things down so that we could freeze frame and here, look where your weight is here. And as I started doing that, I started noticing how many horses would get wide-eyed and flinch every time the riders were picking up the reins. So you slow down, let them see you coming. One of the things I try to coach riders on is as you're picking those reins up, or if you're in contact, I want you to feel the horse's tongue. You should feel when you make contact with the tongue. You should feel when they're licking and chewing or when they're swallowing. And if you're not feeling that, the communication that you have is very one-sided. You're not hearing the horse's side of the conversation. So I would want you to open your eyes and kind of wake up to that and start looking for some of those more subtle cues from the horse. Again, going back to that sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system deal, I did a tremendous amount of research on this stuff, and particularly things like the hyoid mechanism and swallowing and all of that. And I could tell you there's probably no more important thing that you want to see your horse do regularly when you're riding them than swallowing. If your horse is swallowing regular, you're in good shape. If they're not, you're not in such good shape. So that's really where a lot of the mechanics of the bit, the copper and sweet iron and all those sorts of things. We talk about wanting a horse to have a wet mouth. Well, why do we want a horse to have a wet mouth? And the real reason there is because if they're salivating, they are also swallowing. Now, if we have like a white foamy mouth, that's an indication that the horse is not swallowing. And that's one of the big red flags that I see. You will not see a horse with a white foamy mouth that's in the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, where he's actually trainable, where he can think and he's not in a primitive reactive fight or flight type state of mind. So okay, I feel like I've been talking for 15 minutes straight there, so I'll toss the ball back to you for a second, Josh.
Oh, this is awesome. I'm just eating it up. I think that that's this. I'd like to hear more little bit about yeah, the swallowing, because for me, the way that tongue works, the way that the tongue is going to even be relaxed, and how it's going to support and feel the bit, and how you're going to feel the bit and swallowing. I'd love for you just to keep building, if you're okay with that, Daniel.
Okay.
Like this, I feel like we're
Yeah.
we're moving. Yeah, if you're all right with that.
So yeah. So if we think of like biomechanics, the way the horse's body all works together as a system, the very first muscle in that system in your communication is the tongue. So if you pick up on those reins in such a way that that horse braces up in the tongue, and defensive tongue reactions is far and away the most common bit problem that we see, like is 90% of it. If you cause a bracing reaction in that tongue and that horse withdraws its tongue even slightly, or you have a muscular contraction in the base of the tongue. The tongue is huge further back beyond the molars and back into the throat. It's like as big around as a football, basically.
Mhm.
And it directly ties into the hyoid apparatus. And then the hyoid apparatus goes up toward the horse's ears. It looks like a little Y-shaped cradle inside the jaws of the horse. We have the vagus nerve that passes right through that mechanism. We've got 3 different pairs of muscles that go directly from the hyoid apparatus to the sternum and to the insides of the shoulders. So I can promise you, if I could watch a horse 100 yards away, far enough away that I can see that horse is stiff in his shoulders and so forth, and I know that horse has a tongue problem
Mhm.
right now. If you lock the tongue down, you're going to cause stiffness in those shoulders for sure. And then, of course, that all, the sternum and all is tied directly to the rectus abdominis, goes straight to the hind end. If you cause defensive reactions in that tongue, it is going to radiate all throughout that horse's body.
Mhm.
And so I don't think we're nearly aware enough of the tongue and the damage that we do to it. And like I was talking about earlier, all of the neurology that's involved right there, the tongue is quite prone to sensory overload. I almost view it like an autistic child when I'm thinking about
Mhm.
a horse. Like you could maybe put some headphones on an autistic child and take him to a parade, but he's only got so much emotional battery before the noise and the overload of the senses is going to get to him.
Mhm.
And so if you're hanging onto your horse's mouth a lot and doing that to his tongue, it's the same thing. There's a clock running down and he's going to run out at
Mhm.
some point. So be very, very mindful of the tongue, what you're doing to it. I my general rule of thumb, I go in the online courses and stuff, we go a lot into the body language, but I typically want to see a horse just being as natural and normal as possible. A horse would typically swallow at least once every couple of minutes. So when I'm riding him, I would want to see that same sort of a rate of swallowing. If I see more, more movement of the mouth, that can just be nervousness and so forth. So I'm really looking for things to change as little as possible. I want him to look like he looks like out in the paddock when nobody is messing with him. It's one of the things I really try and hammer hard on, the white foamy mouth thing. But if everyone on this call went out to catch their horse in the paddock tomorrow morning and he had a white foamy mouth, you'd be calling a vet. You'd be suspicious there's a poisonous plant that he ate or something like that. But for some reason, we can put that same horse in the Olympics, and all of a sudden, it seems to be a good thing. And I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it's not a good thing. It's very indicative of problems that are going on with the horse's physiology.
So I want to just a question. So regarding licking and chewing and swallowing and the relaxation of the tongue, is lick so generally if there's a salivation, licking and chewing, I know there's a lot of different ideas now around licking and chewing as to why horses are doing it, but generally licking and chewing, does that lead to swallowing, or are those two just separate things, or are you generally seeing that as as a parasympathetic response, or what's your thoughts there, Danny?
Yeah, licking and chewing, as I understand it, if a horse goes from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic, one of the very first things that happens is the digestion stops. And so the ninth cranial nerve kicks off. And when the horse transitions back, that nerve kicks back on, digestion kicks back on, the horse gets a shot of saliva in their mouth, and we see licking and chewing. And so that's what it tells us. It tells us that the horse transitioned back into the parasympathetic nervous system. And so a swallow should follow that licking and chewing, but they should swallow the rest of the time too. A horse produces about 10 gallons of saliva in the course of a day. So just to handle that saliva, they need to be swallowing a bunch. One of the other little things, I mean, if y'all think about it, how many horses these days in the performance horse world have ulcers? Right. And a horse lacks a gallbladder, but part of his physiology is that he has bicarbonate in his saliva, which helps to buffer the stomach acids. So if we take this horse and we've got him out and riding him 2 or 3 hours a day, but we interrupt swallowing and he's not getting the saliva into his stomach like he's supposed to, I think that plays a role. I don't think it's the major contributor to ulcers. There's a lot of things that tie in there, but I definitely think it can be a part of the problem as well. And basically each time that horse will lick and chew and swallow, he is getting a stretch of some of the muscles and the connections in that throat area. And that hyoid apparatus I was talking about, the tongue ties literally directly into the hyoid apparatus, and that hyoid apparatus is tied to the pole, all the cervical vertebra, and then again down into the shoulders and the sternum, like we were just talking about. So every time he swallows and licks and chews, he kind of stretches all of that stuff, and he gets those good feelings that accompany you from stretching. If he's not, then he's basically got tension that's residing there and isn't getting released, and that's going to lead to fatigue, cramping up, and all the same sorts of things we would feel if we were put in an awkward position and couldn't move, stretch, and work it out. So
one thing I remember from the conference that I thought was cool is it was the lip seal. You want to chat a little bit about that, Danny?
Sure. So we call it the mouth seal, and the part I really like to talk about there is that the mouth seal is twofold. So generally we would think of the horse's lips in the front. That's the most obvious thing for us to see. And I do want to see the mouth closed, the lips sealed around the bit. But the mouth seal also resides in the back of the throat. That's part of what the tongue can negatively affect. So in the back of the horse's throat, they have a seal that is formed by the soft palate and the epiglottis. One of the oddities about horses is that they are what's known as obligate nose breathers. So they can only breathe through their nose. They can't breathe in and out through their mouth like humans can. So that seal in the back of the throat is very, very important to them. If we cause things like defensive tongue reactions, or if we get them behind the vertical where the hyoid apparatus is inadvertently being pulled up and kind of choking them with the tongue, we tend to break that seal in the back of the horse's throat. And anytime we do that, we have negatively affected respiration. They're not going to be able to breathe as well. This is also one of the factors where when we see a foamy mouth, well, you're thinking that's saliva, but why is it white? Well, part of that is as if we have broken the mouth seal in the back, as the horse is exhaling, air is now coming into the mouth where it should not be. And so that air can get incorporated into the saliva. That's one of the three ways that the foam can turn white. So it's incredibly important for us to see a horse with a nice, loose, relaxed mouth, not showing, they can wrinkle their lips, purse their lips. They can really show, I'm sure, Josh, the level of a horseman that you are, when you're reading a horse, they're going to show you a lot of their anxiety and problems in their mouth, whether they have a bit in there or not. When you're doing groundwork and other things, their mouth is a very telltale part of the horse, almost as much as the ears and the eyes are. So we really need to keep that mouth as comfortable and relaxed as we possibly can. It's a big part of the system. If any of y'all have ever seen or heard of tongue ties, this was actually one of the research papers that I relied on for the project that I'd done. But tongue ties are one of the veterinary cures for dorsal displacement of the soft palate, the breaking of the mouth seal that negatively affects respiration. So you'll see that a lot in the racing world. Horses that have tongue vices in there, they just tie the tongue down where they can't withdraw it and cause themselves problems. And maybe they get another 10 strides in that race before that horse goes anaerobic, and that's enough to win the race or whatever. That's not the angle I would rather take to solve the problem, but that is the same problem that we're talking about here.
So the mouth seal, so then when a bit is fitting inside the mouth needs to have, it has to sit comfortably enough that there is a seal around the bit. So then just maybe, I know there's lots of varieties of bits. There's angular bits. They have different shapes and bends. There's straight snaffles and broken mouthpieces. Are these now just, are these going to be horse specific, or is there anything around any of that matters that we should know?
So I'll say that a lot of those designs, in my experience, don't make as much difference as we might think that they would. And I tell you what, let me divert from that and make one more point and come right back to that. Is that okay, Josh?
You betcha.
Okay, if I could just get all of you to indulge me for a minute and just sit nice and comfortably and close your eyes and close your mouth and just sit there nice and relaxed for a second. And I'm going to keep talking to you, but make sure and keep your mouth closed and stay nice and relaxed. Breathe in and out through your nose. If you will notice right now inside your mouth, your tongue, particularly at the front part, is going to be pressed up against the roof of your mouth. And if you'll pay a little bit more attention, you should also notice that you are slightly sucking right now. And that is what helps to keep your lips closed. That's part of what forms the seal. And also, if you'll notice, the sensory input that you're getting is coming from 99% of it is coming from your tongue and the roof of your mouth. Your gums are not talking to you right now. So that would be the bars of the horse. So the parts of the horse in the mouth that we really need to be most, y'all can all relax now. The parts in the mouth we really need to be most concerned with are the hard palate, which is the part above the bit where the skull is. The soft palate, again, is way in the back of the throat. And then the tongue and the lips. That's really where all of the sensory input comes from. So getting to your point, Josh, about the different bits, as far as design of bits, there are two main mistakes that you could make there that's going to make it really difficult for the horse to form a mouth seal. The first is if you have a bit that is really, really large in diameter. And I so happen to not have this one on my desk right here that I would normally show. But if you see some of these big rubber plugs or these big hollow mouth bits, a horse just cannot get their lips around a bit that's that big and form a good seal. So that's going to be a source of frustration to them, and you're more likely to see some of the signs of fatigue, the frothing of the mouth, and that sort of stuff with those types of bits. The other thing is adjustment of the bridle. So we kind of have, certainly within certain disciplines, these adages of one wrinkle or two and so forth. And the real secret there is no wrinkle. The bit needs to be looser and lower down in the horse's mouth than most of us think. When I do bit consults and that sort of thing, and we've done a couple of other presentations where we had a live horse and rider and we could do some changes right there in front of the crowd and all. One of the very first things that I'm going to do with most horses is loosen the headstall so that the bit is hanging lower, and I actually want it about 3/8 of an inch, a centimeter or so below the corner of the horse's mouth. And then they're going to play with that a little bit. They're going to pick it up and hold it. When they do that, it's going to be touching the corners of the mouth, but it's going to be nice and relaxed. They're holding it, so they have it where they want it. They're going to be comfortable with it. And all that tissue, the tongue, the lips, the corners, it's all loose and relaxed. So when I pick up on reins and I make those very subtle vibrations, you can see that tissue vibrating. That's one of the things I do in the course and all. We kind of zoom in on some mouths, and if we do the demonstrations, the same thing. And you can stand there just on the ground next to a horse and barely wiggle the rein, and you can see that lip tissue jiggling. And I find when people see that, you realize there's no need to pull nearly as hard as you think you need to pull. For the most part, they can absolutely feel, even well before the rein comes tight, you can cause vibrations in the lips and all. So they can certainly feel that. And I think most of us just don't appreciate how sensitive the horse can be. The flip side of that is, again, thinking of them like the autistic kid. We tend to sensory overload them, and then they have to shut down and form this wall or thoughts of escape, or a lot of these problems that we wind up seeing is simply because we're too damn loud when we're out there handling our horses. So.
And if the bit is creating wrinkles, then that's going to interfere with the horse's capacity to create a good mouth seal. Would that be because I know for myself, I've always just done it by feel. I'm not thinking about it. I just kind of work it and until the horse kind of shows you that place of comfort. But when it is a little bit lower, now the horse gets to set it where they want, and that would complement their capacity to have a relaxed tongue probably as well. But also then they get to set that seal. I feel like that might have been it's just a funny thing because you do, again, for myself, and a lot of this, you do a lot of it by feel. But then when I heard you talk about the mouth seal, man, that sure started making a lot of things make sense as to why you would want to do certain things a certain way, because it creates the opportunity for them to kind of set that up on their own. Kind of a being able to be proactive with how they pick the bit up allows them to be more relaxed in the process. Yeah.
And if you think about it, when the headstall is adjusted with two wrinkles, that is stimulation from the bit, pressure from the bit that we're asking the horse to ignore. That's kind of the bottom line setting. And if you read any kind of behavioral stuff at all, that's the textbook definition of desensitization. That is what you're doing when you have two wrinkles in the bit. You're desensitizing the horse to the bit, and that's not a scenario I ever want to be involved in.
Right.
And I definitely find, as I've started over 1,000 colts, and I've done a lot of work with other horses and stuff. The tip to lower the bridle is absolutely one of the best that I could give you. You can go out there and do that to most horse if they're, have had it adjusted poorly, and you just see that horse immediately just, oh, thank God. I mean, they just let down and melt right in front of your eyes. They do not want to have that pressure there all the time. But another part of the anatomy there is that if you think of where the premolars are, if we're picking up sort of gag action, we're pushing lips, bunching that up and pushing it back toward the premolars. So it's very easy for the horse to bite themselves in the cheek and wind up with some sort of an ulcer or, some kind of a sore in the mouth right there, which again is not something I want. I don't want them thinking, oh no, the bit's coming, this is going to hurt. That's not the anticipation we would ever want them to have. So,
all right, cool. Anything else with that, Daniel, you want to share? I just a couple questions coming in, and I want to be able to make
no, we can jump on those.
Okay, perfect. Ro just said in the chat here, she heard about that it should be hanging 1 inch from the rear teeth. Please clarify the 3/8 again. So I think you were talking about the distance between.
So and this is just a general rule of thumb, right? I mean, horses all are built a little differently. This is just kind of where I would typically start. But if you stick your finger in a horse's mouth, the molars are like a finger length back from the corner of the mouth in a standard sized horse. So if you're an inch, then you're a knuckle pulled back into the lips all the time. That's where you start before any pulling of the rein happens. So that would be too tight for me, unless we were talking about a Shetland or something like that. What I'm generally looking for is I'm going to adjust the headstall where the bit would be hanging at rest just below the corner of the mouth when the horse's mouth is at rest. They can they can move their lips and kind of pull the corners back just like we can. But if the horse was sitting at rest, I would want the bit hanging just below, and it's only going to be there for a second. They're going to lick, chew, play with it, they're going to pick it up, and it's going to be sitting right there. But I very literally want the horse to pick the bit up with their tongue and their lips, to suck on it and to hold it where they want it. One of the pictures that I use sometimes, and I'm sure you've had this happen as you're starting colts and things, but usually a week to 2 weeks in, I'll go one day to take the bridle off of the colt, and they'll still be holding on to the bit, and they're holding it completely independent of anything. Like that's a horse that's actually holding the bit. That's what we are looking for. If you're taking the bridle off and they're immediately open their mouth and they can't get it off soon enough, that should be a real big key to you as to what is going on in that horse's mind with the bit.
Yeah, that's really good to know, actually, because I got a bunch of horses that want to do that. You try to take that bridle off and they're just holding it, and then I always just give them time with that, and I let them bring that out themselves. But is that an indicator of a bit seal? Like, that's an indicator that they're kind of holding that, and okay, good to know. Good deal. Cool.
That's a gold star for you. Yep. That is saying they approve. They're not fearful or worrisome of the bit. That is exactly what we're looking for.
All right, good. So there's some questions coming in on the text or on the chat side, but guys, if you want to if everybody's willing to just kind of get to their question and be quick, like kind of share space and time. If you're available to share those questions, that'll come out better than me repeating them. But I see Felicity here. Felicity, I'll unmute you if you want to share your question. There you go.
I'm unmuted. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Daniel. Great talk. I have a question to do with the lip seal and horses after a while riding them, particularly when you go into an upward transition, go into a trot or something, that will cough. Is that related?
I would not think so.
Okay.
The cough, I could see that being several different things. I don't think it would have anything to do with the mouth seal. Again, there shouldn't be any respiration coming in through the mouth, so it's not like they would have inhaled something or a particle of grass that was in the mouth or something like that. So I wouldn't think those are related.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Probably has more to do with like a contraction as they are, engaging and going up, that they may have loosened phlegm or something along those lines. But or if they're changing positions of the head, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the angulation of the head, whether they're a little nose out or on the vertical or behind. There's a ton of complexity in that. So I would think it'd more likely be something like that.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. Jen?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much. I've already learned so much. My horse dropped a rein when I was getting off her split rein. She stepped on it, cut her tongue in half. This was 4 years ago. So my question is, does she have more sensitivity, less sensitivity? What can you talk to us about how a horse heals their tongue, and if you would recommend something that, you know, I'm totally developing way more of a softer feel, but just some advice around that.
So definitely going to be less sensitive. It would be hard for me to say the degree of which. I mean, but basically, you now have soft tissue scarring, and so if you've ever had a major surgery or something like that where there was a scar, there'll be insensitivity there. Now, the good news is that nerves in soft tissue like that do repair themselves, so you may get some of that sensitivity back. But I think they grow at like a millimeter a year or something, so it's not the kind of thing you'll see rapid improvement in, but you do still, the very first tissues of the mouth to receive signals from any part of the bit are the lips. So you still are, you know, have the lips, with assuming they're not also scarred. It shouldn't be that big of a game changer for you, as long as the horse isn't too traumatized where, you know, there's an automatic association with that now. But I would still try to be as subtle as possible and kind of see where that horse, there's probably more variation in just the average horse population. We have some that are very sensitive and some not so much. So that probably plays a bigger role in that than the damage from scarring.
Okay, thank you.
Daniela? Or Danielle? Sorry.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you. Going back to the example of like regulation and like sensory input, I'm wondering about a horse who is almost like seeking sensory input with the bit. And what I mean by that, like chewing on it. He's not trying to spit it out, but a lot of chewing, movement, even grabbing the reins, like when the bit is in, but that behavior doesn't occur outside of him wearing his bridle with the bit. So I'm just curious about it. And he's also super young.
So I would tend to more associate that just with overall nervousness, and he is expressing it through his mouth. So I don't think that's necessarily a bit related issue. It just, now there's something there for me to play with, and I'm a little nervous. So it's like if you give a 5-year-old kid a piece of gum, and next thing you know, they're popping bubbles and things like that. This is never my first thing to do, I'm always going to be kind of patient, and hopefully they work their way through it. And if that horse is also fairly mentally immature, just in general, then I might just wait for that to them to grow into themselves a little bit more. But that's the sort of situation where some of these bits with pacifiers, like a lifesaver mouthpiece in a snaffle that'll have a ring in the middle with some little copper rollers, and they can roll that, if that, I call them pacifying bits, so that horse can kind of play with that inside the mouth, and outwardly they'll look calmer and more reserved rather than having all of the outward expression. That's not my first thing to do. So I have seen horses that had no mouth problems whatsoever, and then the owner put a bit in there that had lots of doodads for them to play with, and next thing you know, they're the 5-year-old kid popping bubbles that's annoying everybody, and they were perfectly calm before. So I don't give them gum unless I have a reason. But if you do have a horse that's very, very nervous with the mouth, then sometimes those types of bits with some rollers or beads or things to play with can be just enough to kind of help keep them calm. That's generally going to be, so again, the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, we think of sympathetic as fight or flight, but it also involves fidget and freeze. And so that sounds more to me that like a horse that's in fidget. So I would think if you could just generally work on more tools to bring them back to the parasympathetic thinking, put them to work, have them calm and relaxed, that would be more the approach I would want to take with that horse, because it's probably indicative of other problems, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. That's kind of seems like that start touching into the training side too, and that's, you know, really, really good point, right? Because is that, setting them up, getting them working, getting them in a right state of mind, and then, because I find a lot of times some of these bidding things can actually just become real habits where the horse was, now they're expecting that, now they start playing, and so that can change that too. So yeah, good. Yep. Megan.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, so I have 3 years ago got a very shut down oh my gosh, sorry. Obedient shutdown horse, and I've come off a few times. I pretty much just do ground stuff. And last year he just refused a fly mask. And in the last year, when I've offered him a bit, he doesn't want one. And does that change, or should I have like a clinic in a couple of weeks? And I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that. He's just not, he's very responsive to feel and thought when I'm in a good place. Yeah, I don't know if that's a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a little conflicted on, you described him first as being shut down, and then everything that came after kind of sounded not shut down at all. So is it a case of we've got the mechanic and we took the car apart and now we don't have a drivable car and we're still putting it back together, or what, how do you reconcile that?
Sorry, when I got him, he was, and I've totally taken the pressure off, got him a pony, and I just do groundwork, and I just like sit there with him and ask him to do very little. So yeah, he's had 3 years off pretty much.
Well, I would say try to engage him again a little bit more. I always go back to the herd behaviors, and if he were in a herd with an alpha mare, that alpha mare would still be pushing him around and putting pressure on him. So I don't know that total avoidance of things is your route there. You probably need to get him a little busier, a little more engaged, and that sort of thing. Sometimes they need a job and a task, and idle minds are the devil's playthings. So that may be more the situation that you have going on there.
Okay, you're not the first person to say it. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, such a balance between, and I feel like that's a big piece in our world right now. It's when do we need to take a step back to allow the horse to process and think and become regulated, and then when are they ready to start being asked harder questions so that they can become empowered to look at their world differently. And that's a big piece, because I feel like there's a touch of that in the bidding conversation. There's a touch of that in the training world of, when do we step back? And it sounds like, Megan, you've taken time to step back, and that's probably helped him settle, but then also empowering him to learn how to look different at his world. That's a real big part of that, so that then they can have a new lens to engage the challenges. So yeah, really good. I think I see it looks like Claudia, but it says Ellen. Is that you, Claudia?
That's me. That's
Okay.
me. It's a double name. Thank you so much. And yeah, very, very cool lecture. I just love it. Learned a lot already regarding, the foam seal, the myth of the foam seal and stuff. For somebody to take that apart is really instrumental. It's really good. I have a question regarding a mare that came into my care, and that has a lot of bad feelings about bits. And that came with the instruction, she doesn't like bits, like don't use them. And she's well into her teens now. What would be your, if you had a mare in rehabilitation, essentially, that, has strong opinions, but is also somewhat shut down, probably has been trained with a lot of pressure. How would you go about sensitizing her again to a good feeling of a bit, and that it could mean something very useful to her?
Okay, so I've got one exercise for you here, and if everybody did this enough and to the degree that they needed to, then 90% of all of your problems would be fixed. And this is basically get on the horse. I would do this with a single jointed snaffle, but you really could do this with just about any bit. I wouldn't use a spade or something, but if it's a bit that's appropriate to pick up on just one rein at a time, I would simply ride the horse forward. I would pick up on one rein, very specifically, only one rein at a time. I would move my hand so ridiculously slow they would take 18 steps before I could make contact, and I would keep pulling until I got a little bend and a little softness, and then I would release and we would walk off in this direction, and then I would pick up on the other rein again, so ridiculously slow it's not even funny, and they would see me coming from a mile away. They would have no reason to brace up against me, even if that's already the default setting. They will be able to relax through that and start to feel me. I have no problem with pulling hard when I do this, but I pull hard slowly, You can absolutely scare a horse and get them to brace up by pulling soft but quick. The slow and the quick is the part to be more concerned with. So if this horse, if I'm picking up very, very slowly and I'm getting no response, I'll just keep pulling until it's about as hard as I can pull until I get my response, and then I'm going to release, but very, very, very slowly. And I would be willing to bet if you do that the way I'm asking you to, within about 5 minutes, you cannot make that rein come tight anymore. They're going to feel you and see you coming, and they're going to bend that direction, and you're going to see all kinds of licking and chewing and deep breaths, and they may even just want to stop, and I would let them, and they just need to. So like the other lady with the 3 years for the horse to decompress, that's not a process that generally takes 3 years. That could be weeks or maybe months, but it doesn't need that long. A lot of them you'll get there in 15 minutes if you do that with this kind of stuff. So just walk forward, pick up. You can do this in the hallway of the barn on a rainy day. You don't even need an arena. Just super, super, super slow. You're definitely feeling for the tongue. Let them lick and chew, and that's also going to connect them to you. They're going to start really mentally getting in that game, seeing you coming. They're not going to be defensive about it because of how slow and easy you're going, and you're going to get connected. Those ears are going to start following you and all that kind of stuff. One of the other little tips, kind of a next level tip, is let's say I pick up on the right rein and I want that horse to bend to the right. I want to specifically look at the horse's eye, and I want to see if that horse looked at me, or if I'm seeing the white of the back of the eye. If I'm seeing the white of the eye, then that horse is actually still looking forward and thinking about escape. But if I can pull them in some little circles to the right, and then at some point in there, they actually look at me, that's my point to release. And now I really have a horse whose mind is coming to the right and to me when I start to affect that rein. So I would be willing to bet if you did that, and if the other lady with the horse that was off for 3 years did that, then y'all won't need Josh and I nearly as much.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that same exercise faster and faster and faster. I would want to be able to do that at the lope as well. I wouldn't start there, but we do way too much pulling on both reins at the same time and not nearly enough on one rein at a time.
Mm-hmm. And you would just let her work out her ill feelings about the bit with the biting on it and chewing it and being mad about it. You just would not interfere with that at all and do your thing.
I would probably give her a few weeks of that, and I would just ignore it. And maybe I need to do something about that a little ways down the road, but most of them let go of all of that stuff. Those are the symptoms, but they're not the disease. We're going to focus on the disease, and then the symptoms just magically melt away typically. One of the things I will say, like the adjustment of the bit thing to get them to pick up on the bit, that works with 99% of horses. The horses that I see that it doesn't work with are the ones that are in their late teens and 20s that have been handled that way for 20 years, and they're just not going to be comfortable any other way. I'm not going to say they're ruined, but they're kind of resigned. And so if I make this horse much more uncomfortable by doing this, then I'm going to abandon ship. It's not my ego that's involved. I'm going to do what that horse needs, and what that horse needs is unfortunately not what is best for him, but it's kind of too big of a problem to tackle to get that one that's that resigned to that stuff. Most of them, the majority of them, you can fix, but some of them, if they're still playing with the bit, won't pick it up after a couple weeks of trying that, then that dog's just not gonna hunt. You're gonna have to kind of do what kept them more comfortable. But like if I'm starting a young horse, no way would I go down that road. I'm gonna keep it right from the start.
It's such a neat question, because I feel like this plays exactly, because I know Claudia's heart, and I know the struggle here, and so there's so much desire to kind of do right by a horse, and what does that mean to be able to reset them and help them get to a positive place? Okay, and then they have these triggers, they have these things that come up, and how do you then So the question is, do you keep backing off, and do you get to a place where you just you don't trigger them and you get them? And the hope is that I think that if we back off enough and we show them a whole bunch of new things, that maybe that will fix it. I think that's a question out there. And then the next one is, okay, well, is there a way, or do you need to actually ask that question, bring up those thoughts, but then handle them differently? And I think that's the difference between when you've developed a green space. If there's no green space, then it's hard because you don't really have any street credit. But then when you get into the yellow, and I think that's what Daniel said, he's like, we're gonna go into the yellow, and I'm gonna handle you different than you had expected in the past. But then you're gonna have to have a period of time where I'm gonna show you I am not gonna handle you the way, but we are gonna have the conversation. It's like I know it's a hard conversation, and I know you have all these old ideas, but it's going to be important for us to have this so that you have something replaced from that old trigger. So anyways, cool. Thanks for that, Claudia. Good question. Kristen.
Hi, thanks so much. I have a quick question. So I've had a little bit of conflicting advice, and I'm just wondering, I guess, if there's indicators or a point when it's not necessarily the training and it's actually just the type of bit or that it is, if that makes sense.
Sometimes, I'll say that about 75% of the bit problems that people come to me with aren't the bit. Sometimes it is. So what I'm generally looking for there is the horse's level of training and what our goal is. And then I just want to see, do we have a bit in this horse's mouth that is appropriate to those two things? And if we do, then I don't change bits around a whole lot. Like I'm not affiliated with any bit company. I'm not going to try to sell you bits or anything. I'm more consumer protection. I kind of think we have all these cool looking bits and people spend money on them, and then they just hang in the tack room collecting dust for the next 15 years. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. So I don't really jump on the bandwagon of we need a new bit or we need to change things up. As long as we're working with something that's appropriate, then I probably would stay the course. One of the things I see a lot is that people will change bits, but then ride exactly the same. And if you were to look at a fine horseman like Josh riding 10 different horses at some event, would he ride all of those horses the same, or would he adjust to the horse that he's on now and change things and ride that horse the way that horse needed him to be ridden? So if you adjust to what the horse needs, then you probably need to change tack a lot less than you think you do. Now, sometimes we just have something truly inappropriate in the horse's mouth, and what you need to do with this horse, that's just not the right tool. And without a more specific example, it would be hard. I could give you 100 examples of that, but
well, like right
so yeah,
now,
there are times when it's an inappropriate.
Oh, yeah, like
Go
right
ahead.
now I'm using an egg butt snaffle, but then I was at a clinic and he's like, try this other bit, this miler bit, and she's quite sensitive horse already, and there was quite a big difference. And now I'm like, is it her training or is it the bit? And it was just a bit interesting.
So was the miler bit like one of the comfort mouth bits, or
it was a level 3. It was one of the ones that like has a connector that prevents it from bending.
Okay. So basically what that is doing is giving the horse a little protection for their tongue. So again, is it that the horse needs that bit to protect its tongue, or is that the rider is handling that bit in a way that the horse needs protection from the way the bit's being handled? And so that type of bit does give the horse a little bit more protection, but you could still use it improperly. So those are technically still single joint or double jointed bits. In the snaffle world, the double jointed bits, and this is not even a close statistic. It's like 80% of the mouth problems I deal with is a horse being ridden in a double jointed snaffle bit. Like 80%, it's the vast majority. There's not even a second or a third place. Like it's almost all of them are that bit. It's not that that bit is an evil bit. It's that that bit is a tongue pressure bit. And the way we tend to ride them, if you think you're going to put a tongue pressure bit on a horse and then go hold them in a frame for 45 minutes, they just can't take that. That's the sensory overload. So it's not the tool, it's how we tend to use that tool, and we just can't do it. So what Myler has generally done is made bits that are sort of foolproof. They took part of the sensitivity out of the equation, but gave the horse a little protection. But with a different rider that's adjusting a little more, the horse doesn't necessarily need the protection. So this is sort of one of my things, is that we tend to, how many of y'all have ever bought a horse and they said, now this is this horse's bit? That's not how it works. We look at that backwards. This is this rider on this horse's bit. But you put Josh on that horse and Josh could get away with something radically different because he will adjust and he has good timing and feel. The horse would have no problem with it. So they're not nearly as lined into a single bit as we tend to think that they are. There's a lot more variability there. And most of the time the problem resides on the end of the reins in the saddle, not the end of the reins near the bit. If that makes sense. I'm not calling you a bad rider here. I'm just saying that's the tongue thing is a big deal. And so if we're pulling on the tongue for long periods of time or too much at a time, then that's when that horse needs a little protection. But if you just became aware of it and really conscious of one rein and a little bit slower, then I'll bet that other bit would feel just fine to you also.
Something that just
does that make sense?
Me,
Yes.
Daniel, a lot of times with those egg butts, they're a bit wider. And you had been sharing earlier that, you know, if they're too wide on the corners, that can be breaking the seal. So wondering if that might play into it too.
Possibly, yeah. It would just depend on that. Like in snaffles, I don't get that much into the difference between, I mean, there is a difference between an O-ring or a loose ring bit and the fixed cheek bits, but like between an egg butt and a D-ring, if everything else was the same and all we did was change the cheek, this is one of these little examples that I like to give. If I put a bag over that horse's mouth and I bridled him for you, and then I said, go ride him for 10 minutes and tell me whether that's an egg butt or a D-ring in his mouth, nobody could consistently answer that, you know. So there is not as much difference between these things. I've seen some trainers that are like, no, he needs to be in an egg butt. You know, if it's the placebo effect and you feel more confident with the egg butt, realistically speaking, as far as the difference it makes, it's so marginal we can't even tell. So
but what I was meaning is that there's a kind of a widening on some of those egg butt snaffles, that they kind of widen, and that's kind of what I was thinking, is that widening could possibly, I don't know if that, Kristen, if that bit has that widening on your bit, but yeah, just made me think of what you had said earlier about sometimes they can be too wide in the corner of the mouth.
Yeah, generally speaking, like for a snaffle, about a 7/16 inch mouthpiece or a 12.5 millimeter. That's for standard horses. That's about as big as you would want to go. If you get into some of the warm bloods and stuff that are, you know, just bigger 17 hand horses, they have a little more flesh. And they can accommodate a little bigger mouthpiece, but you don't, the really big so-called mild bits, these big rubber plugs and some of these things, they're just too big. They do not actually facilitate relaxation in the horses. So
okay, yeah, cool. It seems to me too that I'm hearing through this that there's certain elements of knowledge that we have to have around the bit, and then what interferes is people's desire to do it right, and then it almost feels like there's sometimes struggles in trying to get it right. And then the horses struggle, and then a lot of times I think we might leave them there rather than try to help guide the horses through and give them a new feel and help them understand the bit in a new mindset. So I hear from you, Daniel, that you're experiencing that here's some structure around understanding bits, and then there's also a real big responsibility on how we're handling them, you know, to facilitate a new understanding, whether they're damaged horses, damaged tongues, you know, struggles in the past, but the way we're handling it is going to be a real big part, which is, I think it's kind of partly encouraging because, you have to understand the mouth, but you can really work on your hands too and make what you have better. Ro, you want to ask a question? We'll let this be our last one. Sweet.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask quickly, you were talking about the diameter was my question. Do you actually measure it? Like, I mean, basically I kind of was my finger in his mouth to see, like, cause his palate is low, his tongue is big, he's got a little bit of space to see, like, how much space is there? Can you just discuss how you do that? And what you use to measure?
So in my experience, yes and no. So in my experience with regard to snaffles, the thick tongue, low palate thing doesn't play very much. Their tongue is pretty fleshy, and unless we have something kind of ridiculous in their mouth, they can pretty easily accommodate just about whatever in terms of snaffles. Now, when we get into bits that have ports and all that, that does get a little bit more particular. In terms of, do I actually measure? I absolutely actually measure. The width, all of those things. I saw that someone had brought up width again a minute ago. The main thing about width is that too narrow is always bad. For a shanked bit, you really do kind of need the sweet spot where it's just right on the outsides, but you don't want a gap where it's sloppy and that port could shift around if you pull on one rein. So ported bits need to be pretty well centered, but snaffles can be too wide and there's no real harm or foul with that. But too narrow is always going to be a problem no matter what. And I do actually measure a lot of bits and a lot of horses. I've actually been doing this long enough to see a trend that horses' mouths are trending wider. And bit makers do not seem to be accommodating for that. We need a lot more options out there to be able to buy 5 1/4, 5.5 inch wide bits. I also measure bits from bit makers, and I will tell you that they're inaccurate on what they claim on the website more often than they're correct. So absolutely measure your horse's mouth. And I take a 3/8 of an inch piece of rope. I tie an overhand knot in it. I put it in their mouth just like it would be a bit. I just pull till that knot touches. I don't want to compress soft tissues, but I'm going to pull until it touches, and then I'm going to pinch on my side, and then I measure that. And that is how I tell how wide a horse's mouth is. And then you're measuring the bit basically from cheek to cheek. And again, routinely what the bit maker's website said and what the bit I have in my hands, they'll be off 1/4 of an inch all the time. So I absolutely do advise measuring.
What about, I wasn't really referring to the width, but what about the diameter? The thickness is what I was referring to.
The diameter they're going to have pretty much dialed in. If it says it's a 7/16, they're actually buying 7/16 inch.
No, I mean what the horse, like, how do you know what the horse needs? How do you measure the diameter?
So I tend to change diameter more based upon level of training than anything else. So I'm going to start all colts and all problem horses. I'll put that 7/16 inch in, and that's kind of our base. When the horse gets to handling pretty well and I'm ready to advance things and sharpen them up a little bit, then I may go down to a 3/8 of an inch. So it'll be a little bit more severe. I might also go from like a mullen mouth to a straighter mouth at that point. And that's just making it a little more severe to sharpen the horse up a little bit more. If you're not riding in performance stuff and you're looking for that last 5%, you just trail ride and stuff and want to enjoy your horse, then the 7/16 is perfectly fine to stay with forever as long as it's working. And again, I tend to ride the biggest, mildest mouthpieces on the horses I have the least control with. So I don't take the out of control horse and put a tiny twisted wire in his mouth. We fix the mind with the slow, heavy pull and get that horse back into the parasympathetic nervous system and soft and yielding first. We don't get more severe until we already have a horse. Severity is really for subtlety. It's not to add more brute force. It's so that I can be subtle and it's still felt. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So like the spade bits and all, they may look very, very severe. What they're actually there for is for a lot of subtlety, not for wrestling matches and things like that. So
Cool. Good clarity. All right. Well, this was great. I wanted to just wrap it up, but I wanted to give Daniel an opportunity. Daniel has a bidding series that he has online. And for anybody that wants to kind of dive more into this, I just wanted you to maybe share a little bit about that, Daniel. So if anybody's more interested and wants to take the whole trip, that they would know how to do it.
sure. Well, if you'll go to my website, which is dauphinhorsemanship.com, DAUPHIN horsemanship.com. We have a video on there. It's available now as a digital download in 3 parts. And that's a video that I started putting together about 7 years ago, I guess. And it took me 3 years to get it done. It's been out for a little while now. It's actually been accepted as a teaching resource in over 25 U.S. universities in the equine sciences and studies program. And that was a collaboration with some engineers and doctors. And it's a very legitimate source. That entire video is about 5.5 hours long. And then this year we have come out with an online study course, which is even bigger. It is the one with the master class, which is weekly live Zoom meetings with me, kind of like we're doing right now. Those tend to last a couple of hours and they're for 7 weeks. So that whole course is about 25 hours long. And you can find that at thebitcourse.com. We're going to be starting another round of that here in a month or 6 weeks or so. And we're actually offering a certification program through that. If you would want to, if you have a professional business and you want to add bit consulting to it, then you can take a test once you have finished that course. And if you pass it, then you'll be a certified master bidder through us. I would say that's a very involved course. It'd be about like a college class. You need to be prepared to give about 4 hours a week to it. It has a study guide that comes with it that I think is about 65 or 70 pages long. I mean, it's like there's a lot. We get into a lot of detail. What someone had mentioned about the foamy mouth and all. I've only scratched the surface of what the foamy mouth really means here. I can go on about that for an hour just on its own. So if you're looking for detail, then we've got detail. If you're looking for the cliff notes, then I'm probably not your guy. But anyway.
Cool. Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for taking the time. I know in my community there was a lot of questions, and I recognize that with the level of education in this horse world, that it's better to draw on, friends that have dove in. So thank you for taking the time to share with us. I hope everybody enjoyed that. Yeah, if anybody has any other questions, you can reach out to Daniel, probably through Facebook Messenger or email. And yeah, thanks for everybody for being here, and thank you, Daniel.
All right, thank you, Josh.
Bye for now, guys.
Thank you.